The silence in the courtroom was a weapon, sharp and heavy. On one side sat Nathaniel Sterling, the man who had promised her forever now, a stranger, across a chasm of lies. Beside him, cool and untouchable, was Ava Munro, the woman who had shattered her world. And then there was Sophia, 8 months pregnant, her body a vessel for a new life, her heart a graveyard of broken vows. She had come for justice, for a clean break from the wreckage. But as her voice cracked and her tears fell, she had no idea that the woman on the bench, Judge Evelyn Reed, was about to uncover a truth far more devastating than a simple affair, a secret that would redefine victim and villain and change all of their lives forever. Life for Sophia Rossi had once been a blueprint for happiness, meticulously designed and flawlessly executed. She and Nathaniel Sterling were the golden couple of their affluent San Francisco circle, their home a stunning Pacific Heights Victorian that Sophia herself had helped redesign was a testament to their shared taste and success. Its wide bay windows overlooked the sparkling azure of the bay, a constant calming presence that mirrored the early years of their marriage. Sophia, a gifted architect with a promising career, had willingly set aside her own ambitions to support Nate's meteoric rise in the competitive world of finance. He was brilliant, charismatic, and devoted, or so she had believed. Their life was a symphony of shared dreams, late-night conversations over glasses of Cabernet, spontaneous weekend trips to Napa, and the quiet, profound joy of planning for their first child. The nursery was almost complete. Painted in a soft, gender-neutral shade of sage green, it was filled with the tangible evidence of their love. A hand-carved wooden mobile of celestial bodies hung over a sleek, modern crib. Tiny clothes, folded with reverent care, filled the drawers of a restored antique dresser. Every evening, Nate would come home, kiss her soundly, and then press his hand against the swell of her belly. His voice, a low murmur against her skin as he spoke to their unborn child. These were the moments Sophia held on to the foundation upon which she had built her entire world. It was a foundation of trust, of unwavering belief in the man she loved. The first crack appeared as a hairline fracture, almost imperceptible. It was a credit card statement left carelessly on Nate's desk. Tucked between charges for business lunches and client dinners was one from a boutique hotel in Carmel by the Sea, a place they had once called their romantic getaway. The charge was for a 2-night stay on a weekend Nate had supposedly spent at a mandatory finance conference in Chicago. A cold dread, foreign and chilling, seeped into Sophia's bones. She tried to dismiss it, to rationalize it. A mistake, a corporate booking error. Nate had a perfectly logical explanation for everything. But the seed of doubt, once planted, began to sprout insidious roots. She noticed other things. The way Nate now guarded his phone, angling it away from her when a text came through. The late nights at the office that became more frequent, his excuses layered with industry jargon she didn't quite understand. He would come home smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't hers, a subtle floral scent that clung to the fibers of his expensive suits. When she'd gently question him, he would master the art of loving gaslighting. "Sophia, darling, you're being overly sensitive. It's the pregnancy hormones," he'd say, stroking her hair. "You know my work is my priority right now for us. For the baby." He made her feel irrational, her intuition a symptom of a condition rather than a valid alarm bell. The facade of their perfect life finally crumbled on a Tuesday afternoon. Driven by a gnawing suspicion she could no longer ignore, Sophia had hired a private investigator, an act that felt like a betrayal in itself. The manila envelope, arrived via courier, cold and impersonal. Her hands trembled so violently she could barely tear it open. Inside were photographs, glossy, irrefutable, and utterly devastating. There was Nate, her Nate, his arm wrapped possessively around a stunningly beautiful woman with raven black hair and a smile that seemed both confident and predatory. They were laughing as they exited a Michelin-starred restaurant. They were kissing deeply and passionately under the warm glow of a street lamp. The final photo was the most damning, the two of them framed in the window of that same Carmel hotel, a bottle of champagne on the table between them. The woman was Ava Monroe, a name Sophia recognized. Nate had mentioned her as a key business associate, a consultant on a major merger. The lie was so audacious, so complete, that it stole the air from Sophia's lungs. The pain was a physical entity, a white-hot poker searing through her chest. It wasn't just the betrayal of his body, but the betrayal of their shared reality. The last 6 months of her life, the happiest months as she anticipated their child, had been an elaborate fiction. Every tender touch, every whispered promise had been a lie. The nursery, once a sanctuary of hope, now felt like a mausoleum for a future that would never be. That night when Nate came home, humming a cheerful tune and carrying a bouquet of her favorite peonies, she confronted him. She laid the photographs on their polished marble kitchen island, a mosaic of their shattered life. The color drained from his face, his charming smile dissolving into a mask of shock, then anger, and finally a chillingly cold resignation. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He simply stated, "It's complicated, Sophia." Complicated. That one word told her everything she needed to know. Her love wasn't enough. Their marriage wasn't enough. Their unborn child wasn't enough. In that moment, Sophia Rossi, the architect of her own perfect life, saw it all condemned. She packed a single bag, walked out of the Victorian house overlooking the bay, and filed for divorce the very next morning. The battle would not be for his love, which she now saw as worthless, but for her future and the future of her child. The Superior Court of California in San Francisco was an imposing building of granite and marble, its halls echoing with the hushed, anxious whispers of lives being dissected and rearranged by law. For Sophia, it felt like a colosseum, and she was the gladiator, being led into the arena armed with nothing but her pain and the righteous fury of a woman scorned. Every step her lawyer, a stern, silver-haired man named Mr. Garrison, took beside her felt heavy, each one pulling her further from the life she had known and deeper into this sterile, adversarial world. The air inside Department 204 was thick with unspoken animosity. Nate sat at the opposing table, looking impeccably tailored in a navy suit that probably cost more than her first car. He was the picture of calm composure, his face an unreadable mask. But it wasn't Nate who drew Sophia's tormented gaze. It was the woman beside him, Ava Monroe. In person, she was even more striking than in the photographs. She wore a cream-colored silk blouse and a tailored skirt, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She radiated an aura of untouchable confidence, her posture perfect, her expression neutral. She didn't look like a homewrecker. She looked like a victor. The sight of her sitting there so calmly next to the man who was still legally Sophia's husband was a fresh stab to an already bleeding wound. Sophia's hands rested protectively on her swollen belly, a constant living reminder of what was at stake. The baby kicked a small fluttering movement that was usually a source of immense joy, but now felt like a desperate plea. "Mrs. Sterling, Mr. Garrison," began his voice, a low, steadying baritone, as he addressed her, though his words were for the record. "Can you confirm for the court that your husband, Mr. Nathaniel Sterling, gave you no indication of his long-standing affair with Miss Ava Monroe. Sophia swallowed her throat dry. She looked towards the bench at the woman who held their futures in her hands. Judge Evelyn Reed was in her late 50s, with intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Her reputation preceded her. She was sharp, fair, but with zero tolerance for duplicity. No, Sophia's voice was barely a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again, forcing strength into her words. No. He told me she was a business associate. He lied to me every single day for over a year. Nate's lawyer, a slick, expensive-looking man named Peterson, objected. Objection, Your Honor. The witness is speculating on my client's intent. Sustained, Judge Reed said, her gaze fixed on Sophia. Stick to the facts, Mrs. Sterling. The facts were brutal. Mr. Garrison began to lay them out, presenting bank statements and credit card bills. A charge for $15,000 at a jewelry store for a diamond necklace Sophia had never seen. First-class plane tickets for 2 to Paris, a trip Nate had claimed was a solo business venture. The down payment on a luxury condominium in Soma, leased in Ava Monroe's name, but funded directly from an account controlled by Nate. With each new piece of evidence, Sophia felt a piece of herself crumble. The man she was seeing on paper, profligate, deceitful, callous, was a stranger. Yet he wore her husband's face. Across the room, Nate didn't flinch. He conferred quietly with his lawyer, his expression one of mild annoyance, as if this were all just a tedious business negotiation. It was Ava's serene indifference that finally broke Sophia. When Mr. Garrison presented the lease agreement for the condominium, Ava leaned over and whispered something in Nate's ear, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. It was an intimate gesture, a casual display of their bond in this place of sterile procedure. It was a public declaration that Sophia was the past, and she was the future. Something inside Sophia snapped. The carefully constructed dam of her composure burst, unleashing a torrent of grief and rage. How could you? The words ripped from her throat, raw and ragged, addressed to Nate, but her eyes locked on Ava. All pretense of courtroom decorum vanished. You sat at my table, we met for coffee. Once you told me how much you admired my design work. You looked me in the eye and lied. Ava's calm facade finally wavered. A flicker of something was its surprise. Pity crossed her features before being replaced by a cool mask of indifference. Sophia surged to her feet, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. Mr. Garrison put a restraining hand on her arm, but she shook it off. And you... She screamed at Nate, her voice cracking with the full weight of her betrayal. Tears streamed down her face, hot and unstoppable. You let her. You stood by and let this woman lie to my face while you were sleeping with her. While I was at home, building a nursery for our baby. Our baby. Her hand flew to her stomach as a sob tore through her, a sound of such profound anguish that it silenced the entire room. She doubled over the emotional pain, manifesting as a physical blow. The room began to spin. The faces of Nate Ava, the lawyers, the judge, they all blurred into a kaleidoscope of judgment and pity. Mr. Garrison, get your client under control. Judge Reed said, her voice sharp but not unkind, but Sophia couldn't stop. The breakdown was total and absolute. It was the culmination of months of silent tears, of sleepless nights, of the crushing weight of Nate's deception. She was a pregnant wife, humiliated and heartbroken, falling apart in front of the two people responsible for her destruction. He promised me forever. She choked out her words, dissolving into incoherent sobs. He promised. The bailiff started to move towards her. Mr. Garrison wrapped a firm arm around her shoulders. But it was Judge Reed's voice that cut through the chaos. "We will take a 15-minute recess," she declared, her gavel striking the wood with a sharp, definitive crack. Her eyes, however, were not on the weeping Sophia. They were fixed on Nathaniel Sterling, and for the first time, Sophia saw not just a cheating husband in the dock, but a man who looked utterly hopelessly trapped. The past was not a distant country. For Sophia, it was a haunted house she was forced to wander through every night. In the quiet darkness of the small apartment she'd rented, after leaving Nate, the memories would play on a loop, each one re-examined and recontextualized through the painful lens of the truth. The discovery of the affair hadn't been a single explosive moment, but a slow, creeping poison. It began with the invisible things, the subtle shifts in the atmosphere of their marriage. It was the scent of Ava's perfume, Fleur de Lune, a niche fragrance Sophia had once complimented on a woman at a gallery opening. Weeks later, that same scent started to appear on Nate's collars. When she asked, he'd laughed it off. "Must have been one of the women from the marketing team. You know how they are with perfume." He'd kissed her forehead, his touch meant to soothe, but it felt like he was closing a door between them. Then came the phone calls. Nate, who had always been transparent, started taking calls on the patio, his voice a low, indecipherable murmur carried away by the San Francisco wind. Once she'd walked out to bring him a cup of tea, and saw the look on his face, a private, intimate smile she realized she hadn't seen directed at her in months. He'd ended the call abruptly, his demeanor instantly shifting back to the familiar, attentive husband. Just a difficult client, he'd explained, the lie slipping out as easily as a breath. "You know how it is." The gaslighting had been the cruelest part. He had weaponized her love and trust against her, making her feel like the source of the discord. When she found a receipt for 2 cocktails at a hotel bar near his office, dated on a night he was supposedly working late, she'd confronted him, her heart pounding with a sickening mix of fear and hope. She'd hoped he would have a simple, logical explanation that would make her feel foolish, forever doubting him. Instead, he'd turned it on her. "Sophia, seriously, I was networking. That's what I do, you know this. Are you checking my pockets now? What's gotten into you?" He'd framed her concern as paranoia, her intuition as insecurity. He'd made her question her own sanity. "It's the stress, honey, and the hormones. Maybe you should talk to someone." He'd suggested therapy for her anxiety, all the while being the very cause of it. And because she loved him, because she wanted to believe in the life they had built, she had allowed herself to be convinced. She had apologized to him for her lack of trust. The first time she met Ava Monroe was at a corporate charity gala. Nate had introduced them, his hand resting casually on the small of Sophia's back. "Sophia, this is Ava Monroe, the brilliant consultant I've been telling you about. Ava, my beautiful wife, Sophia." Ava had smiled warmly, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "It's such a pleasure to finally meet you, Sophia. Nate talks about you all the time." Her eyes were a deep, captivating shade of green, and they held Sophia's gaze with an unnerving intensity. "And congratulations," she'd added, her eyes dipping meaningfully to Sophia's barely there bump. "That's wonderful news." Looking back, Sophia could see the lie coiled behind that perfect smile. Ava had been a consummate actress. They'd chatted for 10 minutes about architecture, about Ava's recent travels, about Sophia's pregnancy. Ava had been charming, intelligent, and engaging. She had played the part of a professional colleague flawlessly, all while knowing she was sleeping with Sophia's husband. The audacity of it was breathtaking. She had stood there, a hand on Sophia's arm, complimenting her dress while actively dismantling her life. The memory made Sophia's skin crawl. The final undeniable proof came not from the private investigator, but from a piece of technology Nate had forgotten. He had bought a new laptop and had given his old one to Sophia, saying she could use it for her freelance design work. He'd claimed to have wiped it clean, but he'd missed one thing, the auto-sync feature on his messaging app. One evening, while working on a blueprint, a notification popped up in the corner of the screen. It was a new message from Ava. Thinking of you. Can't wait to get away from all this and be with you in Carmel next week. Forget about her. Just for a few days. Zoe. Sophia's blood ran cold. She clicked on the icon, and a history of their conversations opened up before her, a sprawling, devastating chronicle of their affair. There were hundreds of messages, flirtatious texts, explicit declarations of longing, inside jokes. They talked about his work, about her friends, and about Sophia. They referred to her as the complication, or simply S. S is asking questions again about the Chicago trip Nate had written a few months prior. Ava's reply was swift and cutting. Just handle it, Nate. You knew this wouldn't be simple. Stick to the plan. The plan? The word echoed in Sophia's mind. This hadn't been a spontaneous, passionate fling. It had been calculated, deliberate. They had a plan. She scrolled back, her fingers numb her vision, blurring with tears. She read about their first meeting, their first kiss, their secret trysts. She saw pictures they had sent each other, Ava in lingerie on a hotel bed, Nate smiling shirtless after a run. It was a complete parallel life. He had been living one built on a foundation of her ignorance. The worst part was reading his complaints about her. He'd complained about her mood swings during the pregnancy, about her lack of spontaneity, about the way she was so focused on the baby. He had taken every beautiful, intimate part of their shared journey into parenthood and twisted it into a burden, serving it up to his mistress as justification for his betrayal. She had sat there in the dark, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating her tear-streaked face until the sun came up. The man she had married did not exist. He was a character, a role Nate Sterling played to perfection. The real Nate was the one in these messages, a weak, duplicitous man who mocked his pregnant wife to his lover. This was the web of deception she had been living in. The pictures from the investigator had only confirmed what the messages had already proven. Her marriage was a lie, her husband was a stranger, and her heart was irrevocably broken. Back in the courtroom, the air was still charged with the aftermath of Sophia's outburst. The 15-minute recess had done little to dispel the tension. Sophia sat silently, her face pale, but her eyes now dry and resolute. The public display of vulnerability had been humiliating, but it had also burned away a layer of her grief, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. She would not let them see her break again. Mr. Garrison, sensing her shift in demeanor, moved the proceedings away from the emotional and onto the clinical, the division of assets. This was where Nate's team expected to dominate. His lawyer Peterson argued that the bulk of their wealth was tied to Nate's family trust, and his performance bonuses assets he claimed were separate from the marital property. Your Honor, Peterson argued, his voice smooth and confident, Mr. Sterling has been the sole financial provider for the duration of the marriage. Mrs. Sterling, while a talented architect, willingly chose to step back from her career 2 years ago. We are proposing a settlement that is more than generous under the circumstances, Mr. Garrison countered forcefully. Generous Mr. Sterling spent more on lavish gifts and private getaways with his mistress in the last year than he is offering his pregnant wife for her entire future. He systematically depleted marital assets to fund his infidelity. He projected Nate's financial records onto the large screen for the court to see. The numbers were stark. Hundreds of thousands of dollars funneled into what looked like a black hole of personal indulgence. There were the obvious expenses, the jewelry, the trips, the Soma condo. But there were also dozens of large, untraceable cash withdrawals and wire transfers to vaguely named holding companies. "Mr. Sterling," Mr. Garrison said, turning to face him, "can you explain these transfers to Monroe Holdings, LLC, a company we have discovered for which Ms. Ava Monroe is the sole signatory?" Nate shifted in his seat, conferring with his lawyer. Peterson stood up. "Those were legitimate business expenses, Your Honor. Ms. Monroe was a consultant on the Apex merger. These payments were for her professional services as stipulated in her contract. A contract for over $750,000 for 6 months of work." Mr. Garrison scoffed. "That seems an exorbitant fee for a consultant even by Wall Street standards, especially when there are no invoices, no detailed reports of the services rendered." It was at this point that Judge Evelyn Reed leaned forward, her fingers steepled under her chin. She had been observing the proceedings with an almost unnerving stillness, her sharp eyes moving from the financial statements on the screen to Nate's face, then to Ava's. Most judges would have let the lawyers battle it out, but Judge Reed saw something that piqued her judicial curiosity, a thread that didn't quite fit the tapestry of a standard, albeit messy, divorce. "Mr. Peterson," the judge interjected her voice, cutting through the lawyers back and forth. "Your client's explanation is thin. The court is interested in the regularity of these payments to Monroe Holdings." She pointed a pen at the screen. "Look here. $50,000 wired on the 1st of every month, for 6 straight months. Then a final balloon payment of $450,000. It doesn't look like payment for services rendered. It looks like an installment plan. It looks like a payoff." A nervous silence fell over the room. Nate's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. A muscle in his jaw twitched. Ava Monroe, for her part, remained unnervingly still, her eyes fixed on the judge. Judge Reed wasn't finished. She tapped a few keys on her own monitor. "I took the liberty of looking into Monroe Holdings, LLC during the recess. It was formed exactly 1 week before the first payment was made. Its registered agent is a law firm known for creating anonymous shell corporations." Her eyes narrowed as she looked directly at Nate. "And then there's this Mr. Sterling, the source of these funds. They didn't come from your salary account or your marital joint account. They came from an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, an account you failed to disclose in your preliminary declaration of assets." The air was sucked out of the room. Failing to disclose assets was a serious offense in a divorce case bordering on perjury. Mr. Garrison looked stunned, then triumphant. Peterson's face went ashen. Sophia stared at Nate, bewildered. An offshore account, payoffs. This was more than just a sordid affair. This was something else entirely, something darker and more complex. Mr. Sterling, Judge Reed continued, her voice dangerously quiet. "This court has a very low tolerance for financial misconduct. An affair is a personal failing. Hiding assets and engaging in questionable financial transactions of this magnitude, however, is a matter of legal consequence. I am beginning to suspect that what we are dealing with here is far more complicated than simple adultery." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Her gaze was intense, analytical, as if she were piecing together a puzzle only she could see. She looked from Nate's panicked face to Ava's stoic one, and then for a long moment, her eyes rested on Sophia. "Before we proceed with the division of assets," Judge Reed announced, her tone leaving no room for argument. "This court is going to get to the bottom of these payments. I want to know exactly what Monroe Holdings, LLC was providing in exchange for $750,000 from an undeclared offshore account. And I want to know now." The thread was pulled. The whole carefully woven fabrication was about to unravel. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker, the silence simmering with unspoken questions, and palpable fear. Nate Sterling looked like a man on a precipice, his slick, confident demeanor having evaporated, completely replaced by a raw, hunted expression. His lawyer Peterson was shuffling papers with a frantic energy that betrayed his own shock. He had clearly been kept in the dark about the offshore account. Sophia watched them, a strange sense of detachment washing over her. She had walked in here expecting a fight over money and custody. She was now a spectator at the demolition of a life built on secrets far deeper than she had ever imagined. Judge Reed was in complete command. She was no longer just a referee between two warring parties. She had become an inquisitor. Mr. Sterling, she began, her voice cold and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. I am ordering you to explain the nature of your payments to Monroe Holdings, LLC. And I will remind you that you are under oath. Peterson shot to his feet. Your Honor, I must advise my client to plead the Fifth Amendment. Any testimony could potentially incriminate him in matters outside the scope of this family court proceeding. A convenient, if transparent tactic, Mr. Peterson, Judge Reed, retorted, her eyes not leaving Nate, but his silence will speak volumes when it comes to the court's judgment on his credibility and financial transparency in this divorce. The court can and will draw an adverse inference. She let the threat hang in the air. However, she added a new steely edge to her voice. It may not be necessary for Mr. Sterling to incriminate himself, because this court has done its own due diligence. The judge gestured to the court clerk. Last night, based on some preliminary irregularities I noted in the submitted financials, I issued a subpoena duces tecum to the bank that manages Mr. Sterling's family trust and to the registered agent of Monroe Holdings, LLC. The documents were delivered to my chambers this morning. A collective gasp went through the small public gallery. Sophia's lawyer, Mr. Garrison, looked at the judge with a newfound sense of awe. This was highly unusual, a proactive move that demonstrated Judge Reed's deep suspicion. The documents, Judge Reed said, picking up a thick binder, are quite illuminating. They tell a story that goes far beyond a simple affair. She put on a pair of reading glasses and opened the binder. Let's start with Monroe Holdings, she said. As I noted, it's a shell corporation. But what's interesting is its lineage. The law firm that set it up has one major client, a man named Harrison Monroe. She paused, looking over her glasses at Ava. Your father is... he not Ms. Monroe? Ava Monroe, who had been a statue of composure, flinched. It was the first genuine crack in her armor. She gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. Nate seemed to shrink in his chair. I thought so, Judge Reed continued. Harrison Monroe, the former CEO of Monroe Tech, a man who was by all accounts a bitter rival of your father, Mr. Sterling. That is until Sterling Industries executed a hostile takeover of Monroe Tech about 15 years ago, a move that effectively destroyed Mr. Monroe's career and reputation. Am I summarizing the history correctly? Nate could only nod his face, pale as death. Sophia felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. Harrison Monroe. Nate's father's old rival, the story was spiraling into a corporate vendetta, a drama that had started before she had even met Nate. So we have the daughter of a ruined business rival receiving nearly $1 million from the son of the man who ruined him. The judge stated, her voice heavy with implication. It's a fascinating plot point, but it gets better. She turned a page in the binder. Now let's look at the offshore account, the one you failed to disclose, Mr. Sterling. It was established by your father 8 years ago. But the deposits into this account are not from your income. They are from the Sterling family trust. And the distributions, well, they have only ever been made to one entity, Monroe Holdings, LLC. Judge Reed took off her glasses and stared directly at Nathaniel Sterling. Her next words dropped like a bomb into the silent courtroom. "This isn't the financial footprint of an affair, Mr. Sterling. This is the financial footprint of blackmail." The word hung in the air, electric and horrifying. Blackmail. Sophia's mind reeled. The expensive gifts, the condo, the trips were, they not tokens of affection for a mistress, but payments to an extortionist. "Your Honor, this is outrageous speculation," Peterson sputtered, but his protest lacked any conviction. "Is it Mr. Peterson?" Judge Reed fired back. "Let me present my theory to the court, a theory based on the evidence before me. I believe Miss Monroe, at the behest of her father, deliberately targeted Mr. Sterling. She initiated a relationship and affair for the sole purpose of creating a compromising situation. Once the trap was set, Harrison Monroe, acting through his daughter and their shell corporation, began to extort money from the Sterling family, threatening to reveal the affair and cause a public scandal that would not only destroy Mr. Sterling's marriage, but could also damage the stock price and reputation of Sterling Industries. The payments weren't for love, Mr. Sterling. They were for silence." The judge turned her piercing gaze to Ava. "Is this not the truth, Miss Monroe? You weren't Mr. Sterling's mistress. You were his handler. A honey trap, I believe, is the common term." Ava Monroe said nothing, but a single tear escaped her eye and traced a silent path down her cheek. The entire narrative of Sophia's life for the past year was rewritten in that single moment. The betrayal was still real, the pain was still sharp, but the context, the motive, the very nature of the crime committed against her marriage had been violently, irrevocably changed. She looked at her husband not as a callous adulterer, but as a victim of a different, more sinister kind of plot. And for the first time, she saw the terror that had been living behind his eyes all along. The judge's bombshell had shattered the foundation of the case, leaving everyone in the courtroom struggling to find their footing on the new treacherous ground. The silence that followed was broken by a choked sound from Nathaniel Sterling. It wasn't a word, but a sound of pure, unadulterated defeat. All the fight had gone out of him, his body slumping in his chair, as if the strings holding him upright had been cut. Nate Sophia whispered his name, the sound foreign on her tongue. It wasn't a question of anger, but of stunned disbelief. He slowly lifted his head, his eyes finding hers across the room. They were filled with a profound shame and a desperate, pleading anguish she had never seen before. It was the look of a man who had been carrying an impossible burden alone for far too long. "Your Honor." Nate's voice was hoarse, stripped of all its former confidence. "She's right. All of it. It's true." His lawyer Peterson tried to stop him, placing a hand on his arm, but Nate shook it off. The dam had broken. The truth, held back for over a year by fear and pride, came rushing out. It started at a tech conference in Austin. He began his voice, gaining a sliver of strength as he recounted the story. Ava approached me. I knew who she was, of course. Harrison Monroe's daughter. I was wary, but she was charming. She said she didn't blame our family for what happened to her father, that business was business. She said she admired Sterling Industries and wanted to learn from me. He talked about how Ava had masterfully woven herself into his professional life. She was brilliant, offering insights that were genuinely helpful. The business association became lunches, then dinners. He insisted to the court and to Sophia that he had resisted for months. He loved his wife. He was excited about their baby. But Ava was relentless, a predator playing a long game. There was one night Nate continued his voice, dropping thick with shame. I was in New York for a meeting. We had dinner. I had too much to drink. She was persuasive. I made a terrible mistake. The worst mistake of my life. He couldn't look at Sophia. The next morning she wasn't alone. Her father, Harrison Monroe, was there in the hotel suite. He had pictures. He had everything. The threat was explicit. Harrison didn't just want money. He wanted revenge. He wanted to see Nate humiliated, to see the Sterling family name dragged through the mud. The plan was diabolical in its cruelty. Nate would continue the affair with Ava, funding a lavish lifestyle for her that would be impossible to hide from Sophia. He would pay them through the offshore account. Eventually, Sophia would find out the marriage would implode in a messy public divorce, and Harrison would get his vengeance by destroying Nate's personal life, just as Nate's father had destroyed his professional one. "Why didn't you just tell me?" Sophia's voice was a raw whisper cutting through his confession. "Why didn't you go to the police?" "I couldn't," Nate said, finally meeting her gaze. The desperation in his eyes was heartbreaking. "Harrison made it clear that if I went to the authorities, or to my father, or to you, the story would still come out. But he would make it uglier. He threatened to invent stories to leak fabricated documents to the press, suggesting I was using company funds to create a scandal so big it would trigger a shareholder revolt. And he threatened you, Sophia." His voice broke. "He knew you were pregnant. He said the stress of a scandal like that. It could be dangerous for you and the baby. He said he would make our lives a living hell. I was a coward. I thought I could handle it. I thought I could pay them off, keep the whole thing contained, and protect you from the ugliness of it. I was so stupid. I just wanted to keep you safe." The puzzle pieces clicked into place for Sophia. The gaslighting, the lies, they weren't the actions of a man who had fallen out of love. They were the desperate machinations of a man in a cage, trying to manage an impossible situation. He had been cruel, yes, but his cruelty had been born of terror, not malice. Then a new voice, quiet and trembling, joined the fray. "He's telling the truth." All eyes turned to Ava Monroe. She stood up, her face streaked with tears, the mask of indifference completely gone, revealing a young woman who looked as much a victim as anyone else in the room. "My father is a monster," she said, her voice shaking. "He has controlled my entire life. After my mother died, it got worse. He blamed the Sterlings for everything, for his lost fortune, for her illness. His hatred became an obsession. He planned this for years. He forced me to do it. He told me it was the only way to earn back his love, to restore our family's honor." She looked at Nate. "I didn't want to do any of it. I hated every minute of it." Then she turned to Sophia, her eyes filled with a deep, profound remorse. "And I am so sorry. You were the one person in all of this who was truly innocent. He talked about you all the time. How much he loved you. How excited he was for the baby. It made what I was doing 1,000 times worse. I am so sorry for the pain I caused you." The courtroom, a place of legal argument and cold facts, was now saturated with the raw emotion of shattered lives and devastating truths. The lines between villain and victim had been completely erased. There was no cheating husband, only a man ensnared in a web of revenge. There was no callous mistress, only a daughter manipulated into being a pawn in her father's cruel game. And there was Sophia, the wronged wife, whose entire reality had been a carefully constructed lie designed to break her, but who was now faced with a truth more complex and heartbreaking than she could ever have comprehended. The gavel's echo in the courtroom was not an ending, but the deafening sound of a starter pistol. The race that followed was a chaotic sprint into a new, terrifying reality. Judge Reed, true to her formidable reputation, moved with swift and decisive force. The divorce proceedings were officially suspended, frozen in amber, until the conclusion of a far more serious legal battle. Her call to the district attorney's office had detonated a bomb in the city's elite circles. Harrison Monroe, the vengeful patriarch, was arrested before the evening news cycle began. His face a mask of indignant fury as he was led away in handcuffs. Ava Monroe, looking small and fragile, was whisked away by federal agents, her role shifting from antagonist to the government's star witness. The Sterling Monroe scandal became an insatiable media obsession, a juicy saga of corporate titans' family revenge, and a honey trap scheme that read like a blockbuster thriller. For Sophia, the world beyond her front door became hostile territory. She was the story's tragic heroine, a label she despised. Reporters with telephoto lenses became gargoyles perched on the building opposite her apartment. Tabloid headlines screamed in bold fonts. Pregnant wife's courtroom collapse exposes billionaire blackmail plot. Her pain was no longer her own. It was public property, consumed with breakfast coffee by millions of strangers who felt they knew her. Every sympathetic glance from a stranger in the grocery store felt like an intrusion, a reminder of her humiliation. This external chaos was a pale reflection of the storm raging within her. The truth had not set her free. It had simply imprisoned her in a more complex and agonizing cage. One moment she would be consumed by a white-hot rage at Nate. He had stood by and watched her question her own sanity. He had held her at night while she cried over his supposed stress at work, knowing the entire time that he was being controlled by the very woman she suspected. He had treated her like a child, a fragile doll, to be protected, rather than a partner, strong enough to face a threat alongside him. His protection had been a profound betrayal of its own, a vote of no confidence in her strength and their partnership. How dare he decide what she could and couldn't handle? The fury would make her hands tremble, a visceral need to scream at him for his weakness for the lies he chose to tell every single day. Then just as quickly the anger would recede, leaving behind a hollow ache of pity. She would remember the look on his face in the courtroom, the hunted, broken expression of a man who had been drowning in silence. She pictured him alone in hotel rooms, after his forced trysts, facing the crushing weight of his secret. She imagined the terror he must have felt, trapped between a vicious extortionist and the family he was desperate not to disappoint. This Nate, the terrified, isolated man, was also real. And this duality was tearing her apart. The man who had hurt her so deeply was also a victim. How could she reconcile the two? Nate, barred from seeing her by the advice of both their lawyers, began a campaign of letters. They weren't the desperate, pleading messages she had expected. They were quiet, meticulous, and filled with a stark, brutal honesty. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He seemed to know it was an impossible request. Instead, he offered a chronicle of his descent, filling in the agonizing details. Sophia, one letter began his familiar handwriting, now looking like a script from a stranger. I need to tell you about the nights. After I'd been with her, I couldn't come straight home. I'd walk for hours sometimes until dawn, because I couldn't bear to bring the filth of it into our bed, into our home. I'd stand across the street and look up at our window, and I would feel such a wave of self-loathing I could barely breathe. I told myself it was a necessary evil to keep you safe. I see now that was the biggest lie of all. I wasn't protecting you. I was protecting my own pride, my own terror. I didn't want you to see me as weak as a man who had been so easily trapped. And in trying to save my own ego, I destroyed our world. I know that now. He wrote of Harrison Monroe's cruelty, of the casual threats whispered over the phone, the photos that would be sent as reminders of his power. He admitted that he should have gone to his father, to the police, to her. He had been paralyzed by fear, and for that, he would never forgive himself. Sophia would read these letters, her tears dripping onto the expensive stationery, her heart a battlefield of conflicting emotions. The day she went into labor, a week before her due date, the decision of what to do about Nate felt like the heaviest weight of all. As the contractions intensified, she lay in the sterile hospital bed, her lawyer's advice echoing in her head. Keep your distance. Legally, you are in a position of power. Don't compromise that. But then she looked at the empty chair beside her bed and thought of her son. What was his story going to be? Was his first day in the world going to be marked by the absence of his father, another casualty of this ugly war? With trembling fingers, she picked up her phone. "I'm at St. Mary's," she said when he answered on the first ring, his voice tight with anxiety. "He's coming." She hung up before he could reply. It wasn't an invitation for reconciliation. It was a summons for a father to witness the birth of his child. He arrived looking like he hadn't slept in a week. His suit rumpled his face, etched with worry. He didn't rush to her side or try to hold her hand. He stood near the door, a silent, respectful presence, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and profound sadness. He was there, but he understood he was a guest in what should have been his own life. Hours later, Matteo Rossi Sterling was born, a furious, healthy cry filling the room. The moment the nurse placed the tiny wailing bundle in Sophia's arms, the world outside the lawyers, the media, the betrayal melted away. There was only the visceral, overwhelming love for her son. His small fingers wrapped around hers, and she felt a sense of purpose so pure and powerful it brought fresh tears to her eyes. After a few moments, she looked at Nate. "Do you want to hold your son?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. The look of gratitude that washed over his face was devastating. He approached as if entering a holy place, his hand shaking as he gently took the baby. Holding Matteo Nate Sterling finally broke. A deep, silent sob shook his entire body, tears streaming down his face as he looked at the son he had almost lost, the living embodiment of the life he had so thoroughly wrecked. In that moment, he wasn't a powerful financier or a victim of blackmail. He was just a father, humbled and heartbroken, staring at a miracle. In the weeks that followed, they began to navigate the strange, uncharted territory of their new reality. It was not a marriage, nor was it a separation. It was a delicate, carefully negotiated co-parenting agreement. Nate rented an apartment a few blocks away. He didn't ask for more than she was willing to give. He showed up at the times she designated his presence, quiet and consistent. He learned to change diapers with a surprising efficiency. He mastered the art of swaddling. He would pace the floor with a colicky Matteo, for hours, his low, rumbling voice humming lullabies until the baby finally drifted off to sleep. Sophia watched him, her architect's mind, observing the slow, methodical way he was trying to rebuild. He wasn't using grand gestures or expensive gifts. He was using service. He brought her coffee in the morning without asking. He did the grocery shopping. He fixed a leaky faucet in her kitchen. He was laying a new foundation, one brick of trustworthy action at a time. About 3 months after Matteo was born, they found themselves in the park on a sunny afternoon. Matteo was asleep in his stroller, and a comfortable, if fragile, silence settled between them. "My father called me," Nate said, his gaze fixed on the distant orange of the Golden Gate Bridge. "He wanted to set up a trust for Matteo, a massive one. He thinks he can fix everything with money." He shook his head. I told him no. I told him the only thing Matteo needs from our family is a father who is present and honest. I'm starting from zero, Sophia. For him, and for me. Sophia looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time since the trial. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep-seated humility. The lies were gone, replaced by a quiet, determined truth. The damage was still there, a scar that ran through the very heart of their history. But for the first time, she saw the man he was trying to become, not just the man he had been. "You broke my heart, Nate." She said the word simple and clean without the fire of her previous anger. "And you broke my trust. I don't know if I can ever fully get that back. I don't know if I even want to." "I know," he said softly, meeting her eyes. "I don't deserve it. All I ask is that you let me be a good father to our son." She thought of her own work, of how sometimes a building's foundation is found to be irrevocably flawed. You can't just patch it up. You have to tear the whole structure down and start over sometimes, even on a new piece of land. Their marriage was that condemned building. But perhaps on the cleared ground, something new and different could be built. Not a palace of dreams like before, but a small, sturdy shelter, a family. A slight breeze rustled the leaves overhead. Matteo stirred in his sleep, a soft, contented sigh. Sophia reached out and gently adjusted his blanket. In that small, maternal gesture, she felt a profound sense of peace. The future was not a blueprint she could design and control. It was an unknown territory. But she was not a victim, adrift in it. She was the architect. Whatever came next, it would be a structure of her own choosing, built on a foundation of hard-won truth and the fierce, unconditional love for her son. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like more than enough. Sophia's journey through the depths of betrayal and the shocking maze of truth reveals that the heart's deepest wounds are often inflicted by secrets, not just actions. The story of Nate, Sophia, and Ava is a testament to the fact that things are rarely as they seem, and forgiveness is a far more complicated path than revenge. What would you have done in Sophia's position? Could you forgive a betrayal born from a desperate attempt at protection? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of twisted love, dark secrets, and ultimate redemption moved you, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who loves a powerful story, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Thank you for listening.